Hi, this is John Grillo, and this is a introductory to Cisco Packet Tracer lab, and it's going to be a basic router configuration. But really, the purpose of this lab is not necessarily the configuration, but just basically how to navigate through a router or switch command line operating system, and the different levels and what happens if you make errors. How do you correct errors? The different modes, user exec mode, privilege exec mode, global configuration mode, interface mode, and understanding all those modes. So we're going to go ahead and basically get started. So what we're going to do is just a very simple lab. We have a PC connected to a switch right here, and this lab involves no switch configuration. In later labs, you'll do extensive switch configurations. You could see if I point my mouse over the switch, it has a lot of fast Ethernet ports. And let's do that again. And 2 gigabit Ethernet ports. The fast Ethernet ports are commonly used to connect computers in a common area, such as an office, or if it's a small building, the first floor of a building, second floor of a building. The gigabit ports can be used for backbone connections, high-speed connections between a switch and a router, or between 2 switches as well. So a fast Ethernet port, you'll get 100 megabits per second connectivity, and gigabit ports give you 1 billion bits per second. So the gigabit ports are actually 10 times faster, if you want to look at it that way. Okay. The PC will assign an IP address to the PC. So right now there's no IP address to the PC, and we'll assign an IP address to the router's gateway. So this gigabit 00 interface on the router would represent the default gateway. And by definition, the default gateway is the entryway to the internet. Just picture a bunch of stuff out here, other routers it needs to connect to, and eventually it goes to the internet cloud. The default gateway is basically, if I have to send packets to the internet, what IP do I send it to? And it would be the IP address of this gigabit 0/0 interface. And that's our basic configuration in a nutshell. When we're done, we'll test it and make sure we'll have connectivity. So a couple things to keep in mind. A brand new switch with no configuration, by default, all the ports are turned on. And on a router, it's the exact opposite. A brand new router out of the box, when you turn it on, all the ports are going to be automatically turned off. Hence why we got these red link lights on the connection between the router and the switch, because we haven't configured the internet gateway yet in terms of its connectivity to the switch. Even though the PC doesn't have an IP, right, the port comes on and it stays on when you connect the PC to it. So you'll see green link lights here and red link lights here. So we'll go ahead and get started. We'll click on the router, and then we'll click on the CLI tab. Stands for Command Line Interface. It's the router's operating system. By default, we have no existing configuration in a router, and this is what you would see if you had a brand new router, or if you had a router with no configuration, right? When it starts up, powers up, it all automatically asks, would you like to enter the initial configuration dialog? We're going to select no here, because the initial configuration dialog is kind of like a wizard, and it walks you through the steps of some of the things you need to configure. I find it difficult and cumbersome. In fact, most people do. It's just better to start from scratch. So from here, we're going to select no. We're going to key in no, and we're going to press enter. Okay, and we're going to press enter again to get started. And we're presented with a prompt. So you'll see the router and the greater than symbol. The router represents the host name. That's the default host name. And the greater than symbol lets you know you're in user exec mode. User exec mode is a limited mode. You can perform very few commands in this mode. Uh, when you open up your command line prompt and you're at where I'm at, you're going to have a white background with black font, and the text size is going to be smaller. If you want to increase it, there's a couple things you can do. I'm going to close this window real briefly. And in Packet Tracer, if you go to Options and select Preferences, and you'll click on the Font tab, okay? And what you want to change is the CLI font size. So I think by default it's 10. I changed it to 12 so you could see it easy. And the router iOS text is black and the background's white. And as you can see, I swapped those two. So you can experiment with that. And, whatever's easiest on your eyes, those are the ones you can select. And when you're done, you'll just click Apply. Okay. It doesn't really give you a confirmation. But it'll take effect nonetheless. And you can just close the Preferences window and click on the router again. Okay. And we're back to our prompt. So we want to go to the next level in the router. The next level after user exec mode is called privileged exec mode. And that's analogous to an administrator mode, having like full administrative access. You can perform more commands. You can look at more things in this mode than you can do with user exec mode. The command to switch to privileged exec mode is enable. You type the command enable and press enter. Okay. Now, again, the purposes of this lab is just to get used to the iOS. To log out of the router, right, from privileged exec mode, type exit and press enter. And we're starting all over again, right? So again, press return to get started. And what happens if you mistype a command, right? Let's just say you type EMABLE, press enter, right? You'll get this error. Say, either the command's not going to be accepted or you're going to get this translating enable to a domain server. So it's trying to resolve that enable to a DNS server into an IP address. It's trying to translate it. There's nothing that exists out there. And you have, in most cases, you can just wait for the translation to be done. Okay. So that's one of the things you're going to experience on a Cisco router. Now I'm going to let that run a little bit because I want to show you some other things too. If you notice, I've typed out the instructions for you to do on your own and for practice for configuring the router. And it's step by step. If you just follow these steps, you'll do the complete configuration. So in task 1, we'll configure the router's default gate name. We'll also give it a host name. We'll also give it a user exec mode password, or called the line console password, and the password will be Cisco. So when we log into the router for the first time, you're going to be prompted for a password called Cisco, and we'll actually test that. And then we'll create what's called a privileged exec mode password. That's called the enable secret password, and that password will be Cisco. So when you type enable, you'll be prompted for a password and you'll have to key in Cisco. And then we'll configure this gigabit interface right here, which is the default gateway. We'll assign it an IP address of 192.168.1.1 with a network mask of 255.255.255.0. And what that represents is that the first 3 octets, 192.168.1, represents the network portion of the address. And this last octet with the 0, this gives us a range of addresses from 1 to 254, with 1.0 being the network address and 1.255 being the broadcast address. And then again, the ones in the middle, anything between 1 and 254 would be the available IPs. Now, I like to be consistent when I'm assigning IP addresses to gateways, so it's a good rule of thumb to either assign the first or the last IP address to a default gateway and be consistent throughout, right? Because you're going to have a lot of IP addresses crossing your network. And if you see an address with a .1, you're going to know that that's coming from a network device, a router, for example, and not an actual host, a PC or a laptop on your network. You can also give interfaces descriptions. They're optional. That description command is not required for the lab to work or for an actual router to work. But again, when you're looking at large configuration files, it's a lot easier, right? When you have descriptions on interfaces and you know what the purpose of that interface is. Again, I said by default, all ports on a router are turned off. To turn on an interface, we use the no shutdown command. Okay. To save what we've done, right? So while we're typing in commands, it's running in memory on the router and it's running config file. And again, that running config file is analogous to memory or like a Word document, right? That if you don't save it, if you lose power or whatever, right, then what you've typed can just go away, right? Now, granted, Microsoft Word has that autosave feature, but just look at an older version of Word and remember, you type a couple of pages and you periodically would save the document as you're going along. And it's no different on a router or a switch configuration. So when we're done with task 1 and we got the router completely configured, we're going to go to task 2 and we're going to configure an IP address on the PC. Now that PC has to be in the same subnet as the default gateway. And so as you can see, the IP address, it's 192.168.1.2. The network mask is the same, and I have to specify on the PC the address of its default gateway, right? So when it sends packets out to the internet, it knows where to send it to, okay? And then finally, we'll actually test the configuration from the PC. We'll actually ping the gateway to make sure we have connectivity. So ping is part of the ICMP protocol. And what it does is sends 4 echo requests that are 32 bytes long, right? And it gets 4 echo replies back. And so it's a way of testing connectivity. And then when we're done at the end, we're going to go through and we're going to save the files. So when you save your files, you key in your first name, your last name, followed by the lab number. And I gave an example. Now, it depends on the course. So when I'm developing these labs, I've actually said this in a later lab. I actually did the later labs first, and this is kind of like the last lab I'm doing. I'm not sure if this lab is going to be part of your assignment grade or if it's just an optional activity. If it's just an optional activity, obviously there's nothing to upload and there's nothing for the instructor to grade. But if it's part of your assignment, then the instructor will know your first name, your last name, followed by the lab number. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and click on the router again. Okay, and the translation's been done. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to type the command enable, and that takes us to privileged exec mode. And you notice the prompt changes from a greater than symbol to a hash, right? Now, from there, we're going to go into what's called global configuration mode. And the command to do that is configure terminal. There's shortcuts to all these commands. One thing to keep in mind on these commands, that I'll give you an example. If you type configure space, hit the letter T, and hit the tab key on your keyboard, it fills the rest of the command out. Okay, so there are shortcuts. Some of the shortcuts are CONFT. Some people type config T. It's a little bit longer, but not as long as configure terminal. So there are shortcuts to the commands. Given this is your first lab, we'll spell it out the first time. Hit enter. And notice how your prompt changes. You got the words config in parentheses, followed by the hash. That lets you know you're in global configuration mode. So while you're in global configuration mode, Any changes you make apply to the entire router. And so the first thing we're going to do is set the host name. So to set the host name, you type the command host name, hit the space bar, followed by the actual host name, which would be admin. Now I'm going to purposely misspell it. I'm going to put two N's in there, right? And I'm going to hit enter. And I'm going to see, I'm going to notice how your prompt changes, right? So this is your host name. And then it's letting you know you're in global config mode. If I want to change that to the actual host name, well, the router only can have one host name. You just simply override it and just retype the command with the correct name. And then you could see that it's fixed. Okay. Now that we're in global configuration mode, we're going to set the user exec mode password or the line console password. We type the command line console 0 with spaces between line and console and 0, right? If you make a mistake and if you put these two together, right, and you hit enter, notice you get an error. If you get the error that says invalid input, that means you made a mistake in the command and it didn't take. And so you're going to have to type that command correctly. So I'm going to have to redo that by typing line console 0, right? So you could type line count, C-O-N, hit the tab key, and hit the 0. And this is something you're just going to have to experiment with the Cisco router and get used to the command line. Hit enter. Okay, your prompt changes to config-line. We're going to set the password. You can hit the letter P and hit the tab key, or PA. Let's try that. PASS. There you go. If you type PAS and hit the tab key, it fills the rest of it out. Or you can spell password. You can abbreviate it with pass and hit that's the shortcut to that command. But we're going to spell password out, hit the space bar, followed by the actual password we want to use, which is Cisco. And we're going to press enter. Now, I've said in later labs, if this was a real production router, right, for security purposes, we would want to set more complex passwords, okay? And we want to be prompted for a login prompt. So we're going to type the command login. So again, if I misspell it and hit enter, it's going to let me know. See, it has that little caret underneath the E in login. It's kind of letting me know where I made my mistake. I'm just going to type in login correctly and press enter. Okay, and that configures the line console password. The next step we're going to do is configure the privilege exec mode password, otherwise known as the enable secret password. We're going to type enable secret, and we're going to type Cisco, right, with spaces in between them, and press enter. Okay, our last step, right, we're going to test it. We're going to type end. Okay, I'm going through some extra commands here, which will take us back to privilege. You got to hit enter twice. You could be in any mode, but if you type in and hit enter twice, it will take you all the way back to privilege exec mode. And to exit out of the router, we type exit. And then we press return to get started. And now we're prompted for a password. So the user exec mode password was Cisco. I'm going to type that in and press enter. Now notice it doesn't show you the characters while you're typing, and that could throw you off. I mean, it throws me off. So I just tend to look at the keyboard when I'm typing in the passwords, right? So I don't lose my train of thought or where I'm at. And then I'm going to type enable, right? Because I want to get the privilege exec mode, and the enable secret password was Cisco. So I'm going to type that again and press enter. Now I'm back to privilege exec mode, and I'm going to go back to global configuration mode by typing configure space terminal and press enter. And I'm back in global config mode. Okay. The last thing we need to do is configure the gateway on the router. Okay. So when you're configuring a gateway, you have to go into interface mode and you have to switch to that interface. So if I want to see what interfaces are available on a router, right, there's a command I can do. They're called show commands. Now, normally show commands have to be done in privileged exec mode. But if I put the word do in front of the show command and hit the space bar, I can do a show command from anywhere in the router. Okay, so I'm going to type do space show space IP space interface space brief and hit enter. It says I got two interfaces, right? I got a gigabit 00 and I got a gigabit 0-1. Okay. I want to switch to the gigabit 00 interface because you see in the diagram here, right? I'm connected from the switch to the gigabit 00 interface. So I type the command int space. Now I could spell out gigabit Ethernet, but that is just a little bit too long. I am going to abbreviate this one command by just using the letter G and type 0/0. And notice there's no spaces here, right? There's only a space between the T and the G. And then I'm going to press enter. Now my prompt will change to config-F. That lets me know I'm in interface mode. Any changes I make in this mode only apply to the gigabit 0/0 interface. I'm going to assign an IP address. I'm going to type the command IP space address space 192.168.1.1. Hit the space bar and type the network mask of 255.255.255.0. Yeah, these pop-up emails. Okay, so again, the network mask, when you see 255s and 3 octets here, it's letting you know that the first 3 octets of the IP address represent the network portion of the address. So the network address is actually 192.168.1.0, right? The .1 in the last octet represents the host address. And I'm going to press enter. Okay. Now let's just say, for example, you made a mistake in the IP address. If you just misspelled address, like I'm going to purposely misspell it the first time, right? You're going to get the error, the caret underneath the error where the error was made. And the next step is I'm going to type IP. I just need to retype it correctly, IP address. This time I'm going to type the IP address wrong. I'm going to type, by mistake, I'm going to type a 2.1, 255.255.255.0, right? Now, as you can see, since you can only assign one IP address to the physical interface, if you type in the wrong IP address, you just need to type it in correctly because it'll erase the old one. Okay, so I'm going to show you a little trick. There's a command history recall, right? It remembers the commands that you typed. So if I hit the up arrow once, twice, right, and you get the misspelled command, we don't want to do that one. 3 times, right? Notice this command is the original command that we typed correctly. I'm going to hit enter. Okay. And so 1.1 actually replaced 2.1. And I can actually verify that by typing do show interface IP interface brief. Spaces between all 5, right? Do space show space IP space INT brief. I actually abbreviated interface this time with the words INT, and then I typed brief. Okay. And if I look at that, I could see that the correct IP address has been assigned to gigabit 0/0. Okay. Now I'm going to get this. This is optional. As I said earlier, descriptions are optional, but we're going to give the interface a description. We're going to type the command description. Okay. You can abbreviate that by DESC if you want and hit the space bar, but I'll spell it out and I'll type gateway for admin PC. Now, while I'm giving descriptions, I can have spaces between words. host names cannot have spaces, but you can get around that with using dashes between words if you want to create a longer host name for the router. And we're going to hit enter. And our last step is simply to turn it on, right? And the way we turn on an interface is with the command no shutdown. Okay, that turns on the interface, and you'll notice that the interface has gone to up. And I have to hit enter to get my prompt back. Likewise, if you want to shut down an interface, you would type the command shutdown, hit enter, and the state is changed to down. Hit enter until we have to turn it back on again with no shutdown. Now we can abbreviate shutdown with shut, right? Or you can type SHU and hit the tab key. Right? So there's various ways of going about it. And hit enter, and the interface has gone back to up. And you'll get your prompt back after you hit enter. And so that completes the router config. But before you're done, you have to save it, right? Now, the command exit will take you one step back at a time. So if you type exit, it takes you to global config mode. And if you type exit again, it takes you back to global privileged exec mode. If you want to go all the way back to privileged exec mode, just type end and hit enter twice. Okay. And to save the router, we're going to type the command copy space run start. Okay. And we're going to hit enter twice, right? We're going to accept the default destination file name, and we're going to hit enter again, and you'll get an okay. Again, what copy run start means is you're going to copy what's running in memory, or what's called the running configuration, into what's called non-volatile random access memory, or NVRAM, otherwise known as the startup configuration. So Cisco, it's analogous to saving a Word document to your hard drive. The NVRAM on a router is analogous to saving a Word document on your hard drive. So we're copying what's running in memory, and we're saving it to NVRAM. So if we were to lose power or reboot the router, we would not lose our configuration, all right? Without saving it, if you reboot the router, poof, everything is gone, okay? So that's what that copy run start command means. So we can test it. We can actually reboot the router because we've saved it. And to reboot a router, you can type reload or just REL and press enter. And it's going to ask you, do you want to proceed? And we're going to press enter again. And it's going to simulate the loading of the router. Now, normally when you reboot a live router, a real router, it takes about 2 or 3 minutes. This should only take a few seconds. And we're going to press return to get started. And as you can see, our configuration's still there, right? We're going to type Cisco, and then we're going to type enable, and we're going to type Cisco again to get back to privileged exec mode. Okay, so that completes the router configuration. And we're going to close the router configuration window. And that completes task 1. So task 2 is configuring the IP address on the PC. Okay, we're going to click on PC 0. And we're going to click the IP configuration window. And I got the instructions already provided. And we're going to leave the static IP address button as is. And for the IP address, we're going to key in 192.168.1.2, right, for the instructions, right, because the gateway address is 1.1, and you can't have duplicate addresses on the same subnet, okay? It automatically fills the subnet mask out for us, so that's good. We don't have to key in anything there. We have to specify the address of our default gateway. And to do that, under the default gateway window, we type 192.168.1.1, hit the tab key. We don't have a DNS server on the subnet, so we can leave that blank. And from there, you can close this IP configuration window, which is the X along the blue line here, right? So if I close that and I click the command prompt, one thing I didn't show you in the instructions is how to verify your IP address on a Windows machine, and we can verify it by typing the word ipconfig, all one word, and pressing enter. Okay, and you could see our IPv4 address is 1.2. That's correct. Our network mask is correct, and our default gateway address is correct. If you made a mistake, well, you just need to go back to the desktop tab, close the command prompt window, right? Go back to the IP configuration window and just change it, okay? So I'm going to close the IP configuration window again, click on the command prompt, and the last step is to ping our gateway. We want to ensure that we have connectivity, right? So to do that, we type ping, hit the space bar, and we're going to type the address of the gateway, 192.168.1.1. And we should get 4 successful echo replies. So again, right, that pretty much completes the lab. And you can experiment with the configuration file. If you click on the router, right, some of the abbreviations that you can use are config, hit the tab key, T, hit the tab key, and hit enter, right, to get the global config mode. Type exit, takes you back to privilege exec mode. Or you could type conf space T, hit enter, type exit, back to privilege exec mode, or configure terminal, you can spell it out, right? You can use your show command. So one of the show commands I'm going to show you, not in the instructions, I'll show you an additional show command. You could type exit here. You can also type end and hit enter twice. Just remember, end takes you all the way back to this mode, and exit takes you down one step at a time. Okay. If you want to see your running configuration, type the command show space run, hit enter, and hit the enter key a little bit at a time. You notice up here, our host name is admin. Our enable secret password, right? The privilege exec mode password is actually encrypted. We know it's Cisco, but there it is. It's encrypted. And then we're going to hit the enter key some more. There's our gigabit 0 interface. There's our description. There's our IP address and network mask. And again, if you make a mistake, use your show run command. You know, if you got a wrong IP address and the ping isn't working, you just go back to use these instructions here and key in the correct IP address. If the interface is shut down, it will say shut down. If it's on, it won't say anything, so you know that the interface is on. So if you see shutdown, that means when you did the shutdown command earlier, you forgot to do the no shutdown command to turn it back on. Okay, we're going to hit enter. There's our line console password. Now notice the user exec mode password is not encrypted, right? You see the word Cisco in clear text. That's the end of our config file, okay? And in another command, remember I did do show IP interface brief? Well, if you're in privileged exec mode, it's just show IP interface brief and hit enter. And you can see your gigabit 0 interface, its IP address, and that it's up. Okay, that's a quicker way than doing a show run command to verify the IP address. What it doesn't show you is the network mask. If you want to see more information about the gigabit interface, you could type show space interface D0/0. And it'll tell you that the interface is up, the protocol's up, it's connected. You'll see the MAC address for that interface. This is our default gateway. Here's a description. And it shows you the network mask using what's called the CEDAR or classless internet domain routing. /24 means 255.255.255.0. So if you know your subnetting, you know what the /24 means. Okay, and that's the way of verifying whether or not you have the correct network mask. Okay, now exit out of this, just hit the letter Q on your keyboard, and you're back to privilege exec mode. And one more time, right? Type exit, you log out of the router, press return, type Cisco, press enter, type enable, press enter, type Cisco, press enter. You're in privilege exec mode. Configure terminal, takes you to global config mode, interface G0/0 takes you to that interface. You're in interface mode, the gigabit 00 interface. If you wanted to change the description, you could type gateway default. You could add the word default gateway. What did we have it before? For admin PC. I added the word default in there, right? And so that takes. Now, if I type a do space show space run, hit enter, go to that interface, right? You see how the description changed. Okay, I can hit the letter Q. I'm in interface mode. I could type end. It could take me all the way back to privilege exec mode. Or if I want to go down one step at a time, like just pictures walking down a ladder, walking down a ladder one step at a time is exit. End would be just like jumping off the ladder and, you land on the ground. Obviously, you don't want to be too high up. So we would type exit once. That takes us back to global config mode. We type exit twice, hit enter, takes us to privilege exec mode, right? So again, if you make errors, you can just go back here and correct things, okay? And retyping in the IP address is not going to hurt it any. So config space T, I'm doing an abbreviation now, right? Interface G0/0, IP space ADD 192.168.1.1, 255.255.255.0, right? Interface is already on, so I don't have to do the no shut command. I can verify that with a do space show IP space interface space brief or INT brief, hit enter, and I can verify the IP address of that interface. Okay, now I'll type exit once, type exit again, takes me back to privilege exec mode. Okay, it completes the configuration on a router, and it's already been saved. If you want to save it again, copy space run start. In fact, you have to save it again if you change the description, right? And because that's the only thing we changed, and hit enter once and hit enter twice. Okay, and that completes the lab. But the last thing we need to do is save it, right? So remember to save your file. Go to the file menu, go save as, right? In the file name window, you're going to type your first name, last name, -lab1, and hit the save button. And that completes the lab. I hope you enjoyed the lab.